In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can render out wireframe passes inside of Maya, and we're going to be using Viewport 2.0. Viewport 2.0 is now the default renderer for the viewport, and you get real-time shadows, lighting, everything else like that, and we can also do wireframe passes with that as well. So we've already got it in Viewport 2.0, that's the default now. Now we need to set up some render options, so let's go to this little film gate thing here. Little film clacker, and we go here and change that from rendering from maybe Maya software to using Maya hardware 2.0. Okay, we've already looked at in an earlier video on how we can set up the size for the renderer just by going to the common tab and then setting if we're going to render something like a target file and output that if you wanted to do animation, things like that. And the frame size. Again, I'm rendering twice the resolution of 1920 by 1080 because if I render out twice the resolution, kick it into Photoshop, scale that thing down by 50% of the original size, I get some free anti-aliasing out of the deal. So let's hop on over here to this My Hardware 2.0 tab, and if you just look at the very bottom down here, there's a rendering options that you can click and open up for some different options here. So I think the default on this is going to be shaded. So whenever you render out, if you click this little icon here, this will open up the render view window, and if we do a render of whatever camera we're looking through, it'll go through and render that really quickly because we're using the My Hardware 2.0. So that's going to give you your default way of rendering. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we can open up this render option here and change this from shaded to wireframe on shaded. Now it's going to look like, if you just render this thing right now, it's going to look exactly the same, and you're going to think something is not right here, and you're going to wonder why it's not rendering in the wireframe. At the time of the making of this video in Maya 2015 extension 1, you have to open up this object type filter at the very bottom and turn on the UI option. If you don't, it won't render out the wireframe. Not sure why. I don't think that's a great option, but it is the way it is currently. Hopefully whenever you watch this video in the future, you won't have to set that option. But if you're not getting it, just go ahead and come here and click this little UI thing here and go ahead and render, and we should be able to have some wireframes render with this thing. I'll click one-to-one here, hold down Alt and middle mouse drag, and we can take a look at what's been rendered here. Okay, so this is working and it looks pretty nice. Now I want to have some control over the wireframe color. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys that we can go ahead and select all the geo. I made a group called geo and threw all my geometry in here, so it's real easy for me to select all my geometry in the scene. And we can go under display and we can go to wireframe color and turn that on. So it's possible now that you can select one of these colors from the index and then hit apply, and we can apply that to everything. If you turn on wireframe on shaded, you can see that color gets applied now. And you can do this on a per object basis. So if you wanted the cannon to be like this purple color, you could apply that. If you want this to be a color, you could do that. So every piece can have its own color representation now. But for our purposes, because we're just trying to get a nice wireframe color on top of our shaded thing, that's not really what we want. So I'm going to select all the geometry, and instead of using index, we could use RGB, and you can get a slider like this that you can mess around with, and you can get a color picker too if you pick it that way. So if you want a very specific color, you can do that. I just want to use black, so I'll hit apply and deselect everything. If you don't deselect everything when you render it, it's actually going to pick up on the fact that you've got those things selected. So you can see it's going to render the wireframe green, not what we want. So deselect everything, and you can see it's going to give us that color of the wireframe that we're looking for, and go ahead and render like that. And that will render out the wireframe, the color that we're looking for. So again, you can change this from black to white, whatever color that you feel comfortable with. I'm going to go ahead and turn this thing off real quick. So I'll just do shaded like what we did before, and go ahead and render this thing out. And once that's been rendered, I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'll say File, Save Image. You could do option box, but that just sets and makes sure that you're going to be doing, save color, manage image. It's just nothing you really want to worry about. So just say File, Save Image. You could save as a target file. Now, for my purposes, I'm going to just throw it on the desktop temporarily for me, just to make it easy to kind of find this thing. And so click on the desktop, give this thing a name, and I'll call this shaded. like that, save it as a target file, and then let's take a look inside of Photoshop real quick and open that thing up. And let me find that. Here it is here. I'll open it up. And you can see it's going to kick out the target file, and it's actually going to have alpha information for it. Now the reason the alpha is white is because we've got that infinity wall back there, and it's going to render that entire thing. But if we hide the infinity wall, and I put that on a layer, and I can hide that real quick, just like that. Now if I render this thing out, it's actually going to have some alpha information for me. And that might come in handy too whenever you're trying to separate this guy from the background. So we can say File, Save Image, and then this time I'll just call this shaded render, and this is _A, just to tell myself that I've got alpha on there. And then now I can use that for the alpha. I can open that up, and I'll go to the channels, and you can see here's that alpha channel. I can steal that and hit copy, and I can actually go over here to this image, our first original image, and if I double click this background, it releases it to a normal layer. So I can just call this render like that, and then maybe duplicate it, and on this one I'll just make a mask for the layer, and I'll hold down Alt and click on that, and that'll make that mask available to where I can paste things in. So remember, I copied from this document, and now I'm going to go over here, and just paste it in here. Now if I hold down Alt and click back over, I can get back over here. Now it looks like nothing's changed. It's just now if we put something in between these things and I paint with it, like maybe red or something like that, I'm actually separated out this piece from the background. So maybe that's going to come in handy for you, and maybe it's something you want. So there's how you can set that up. Now leave that, because we're going to get our wireframe on here as well. So it's possible that we can turn on that wireframe unshaded. We can get that as a render, and we can kick this out, and I'll call this just something like wire. So I'm going to put an _W like that for that one, and we'll go to Photoshop over here, and I'll open that thing up. And here's our wireframe. So since my documents are the exact same size, I can just put on the Move tool and then hold down Shift and click and drag from this document into here, and it should snap right into place. And that actually drug under this layer, so I'll click and rearrange that. So this one's now on the top, and I call this wire. And I don't want this black background, so I can hold down Control and click the transparency within this mask that we made. And then now I can select this layer and then click on the layer mask here. And since I have that selection, it'll automatically make the mask correctly for me. So here's two different versions. You got your regular version, and then you got your version with the wireframe. Now I'm going to show you one extra step here to where you can actually get the wires to where they're actually separate from the render itself. And it involves a few more steps, but it can give you a bit more control over exactly how you display the wireframe on here. So go back on over to Maya, and what we're going to do is go ahead and make a new render layer. And so I'm going to turn on this infinity plane, select all my geo, and a render layer is a lot like layers, except for it's used just for rendering whenever you're going to render. So if I want to do something special with rendering, I can do that. So I already know that I don't want any lighting information on this. I just want the geometry, and I don't want ambient occlusion to be on. If I have ambient occlusion turned on, that'll render with that. So we can turn off ambient occlusion, and let's make this new render layer. So whatever you've got selected, and you click this new icon, you can see it's going to create new layer and assign selected objects. So go ahead and click that, and then you can give it a name. If I click on here, you can see how it's going to switch from our normal mode to here's this new render layer that we're working with, and I can call this wire underscore and just leave layer like that. And so now we've got this. The reason it's dark like it is because there's no lights. We didn't bring any lights over with this. So if we click the lights here, you can right click on here and say add selected objects to that area. So that is possible, but we don't want any lighting information. The other thing we need to do, I'm going to make a shader that just renders pure white, and at render time it's going to take all this, render it all pure white, and then give us those black outlines that we're looking for our wireframe. So if we go to Windows, Rendering Editors, and go to Hypershade, and open that up, we can make a new surface shader. And so let's go over here to Maya, and you can see that there's a surface shader right here, and we can middle mouse drag that over, and then I'll just call this, I'll double click on it and call this Wire Surf Shader, like that. The name's not important, it's just for you to keep track of things. And I'll make this pure white, like this, with color. So you could change the color to red or something else like that you want, but I want this thing to be pure white, because this is going to shade everything in the scene pure white, and then we've got black outlines for our wireframe, and that'll look good. So this is what we just created. I have one from an earlier session, so I'm just going to get rid of that thing real quick, and just to make sure there's no confusion on there. So now I can close this thing up. Now, the cool thing about these render layers is that you can assign a whole shader to everything in that layer, and it won't mess with anything in this master layer. So you can always have your normal setup that you're working with, and if you want to do something special, you can make one of these render layers. And if you right click on there and say overrides, and we can say assign existing material override, and here's our wire surface shader that we made, like that. We can assign it to that. Now I know it's going to look a little bit weird in the viewport 2.0 thing right there, but if we go and render the thing out, you can see it's going to render everything white, and it's going to give us those nice black lines that we have here. So now we can kick that thing out. So save file, save image, and we'll call this wire underscore 2. This is their second version of the wireframe that we've got. Hit save for that. Now we can go to Photoshop, and let's load that up. So we'll say file, open, wireframe 2, like that, and it's a black and white image. We can just hold down V, hold down Shift, and click over, because we put it on the move tool and we're holding down Shift and dragging it in. Because this documents are the exact same size, it just lets us copy and paste that thing over. So there's a couple different things that we can do with this. I'm going to hide these real quick. Since it's just black and white here, let's turn off that wireframe thing just to make sure that we're not looking at that in addition to what we're doing. So we've got this black and white image, and if you go into Photoshop, you can set this to multiply, and multiply is going to knock out all the white stuff and then just overlay the black over the top of the image. So that's possible that we could do that. And then now, you know, you can put a new layer in here, and what we looked at before, if you put on the brush tool, you could be painting, and that's not going to affect the wireframe at all. Okay, so that's kind of the advantage of that. The other thing that we could do is this. We'll set this to a normal mode, select it all, Control A. Let's see here. Doesn't seem like it's selecting all. We'll do select all right here. We'll copy it, Control C, and then go to channels, and we'll make a new channel, and we'll hit Control V and just paste it in, and it's not giving us what we're looking for here. So let's just do this again. Sometimes Photoshop doesn't play nice when I'm trying to copy. Select all, Control A, copy it, Control C, make sure I'm on that layer, go to channels, V, Control V, paste that in there. So here's my lines. So here's the cool thing about this, is that now that we've made this into a channel, we can hold down Control and click and select this as transparency. Now, really what I want the wires to be the thing I'm selecting. So if I inverse this, I can hit Control I to inverse, like that. And then that gives me the inverse. You can do that all day long, Control I. You can see you can just flip flop back and forth. And what I want is the white parts to be the selection. So that's why I inverted it like that. And I can hold down Control, click on it, and now my wires are selected. Now I can go back to RGB and go to my layers. I'll just turn this thing off now, and then I'll make a new solid color. Because we have a selection made currently, and we're going to make the solid color, it's going to automatically make the solid color part and the mask for us that we need. Okay, so a solid color just works like this. It makes a solid color and it also gives you a mask, and I just held down Shift and clicked on that to temporarily turn off the mask. So when the mask is not working, it fills all the pixels with red. When the mask is working, if I hold down Alt and click on here, you can see what we just copied into there. It's only going to let that red come through where the white pixels are. Now the cool thing about solid colors are that if you double click on it, you can, anytime you want, change the color of these. Like, so we've got red. If you wanted a blue wireframe, you could change it here like that. If you want green, whatever color that you want, you can always double click and go back in here and change that, and it's a live function, right? So again, I just want this to be black, or maybe we try white for that as well. And we'll zoom in here, tap F, and take a look. So it's really up to you. I think white looks pretty good on here. Black is another color that I think looks pretty good for your wireframe. And now you have controls to change the color of the wireframe, and you can also just, knock back the intensity of it too if you don't want it quite as strong. Now, if this is not strong enough for you, it is possible that you can just drag this thing down onto the new icon. You could get a new version of this, so you're doubling up on it. That's one option for you to kind of get it a little bit thicker on there. You could also hold down Control and select the transparency within here, like that, and you could always fill that mask with white again. So here's this color, I want to fill it with this. So the hotkey for that is Control Backspace. Control Backspace fills with this color, Alt Backspace fills with this color. So I want to fill it with some more white pixels with that selection made. And I'll hit Control Backspace. And if I don't want to see the selection, I can hit Control H. So I'll hit Control Backspace, and you can see it's kind of making these black lines a little bit easier to see at that point. So I hit Control H to hide my selection. If we want to get rid of the selection, Control D to deselect, like that. And so then now we've got a way to kind of, make the wireframes stand out a bit more, and then we can also just drop those back with our opacity and then change color as well. So you've got a lot of different options now for how to kick out a render and then put your wireframe over the top of that as well.